All right, let's start our part 2 of our vocab, 4.3, part 2. We're going to start with the Omani-European rivalry in the Indian Ocean. Omani means the people of Oman, which is right over here. They get very involved in trade, and they are in competition with trade in the Indian Ocean, basically from India and the Swahili city-states, and they are in rivalry with many of the European powers, especially your Portuguese and your Dutch, as they are fighting and battling over these trade posts for the Swahili city-states and also for Indian Ocean. Also, Ottoman Empire wants to get involved in it as well. So basically what we're looking at here is we're looking at the Islamic powers and the Christian powers of Europe are battling over trade posts at this time. Historically significant because trade is a big deal, especially when it comes to spices and products of this area. We do see that Europe slowly does gain more of an upper hand by the end of this time period into the modern era. But it's a rivalry that goes back and forth, and it does lead to some fighting during this time period. Piracy in the Caribbean. Arr, I know I can make a bunch of bad jokes. Anyway, so, what was I talking about again? Oh yeah, piracy in the Caribbean. So the era of piracy in the Caribbean begins around 1500, ends around 1830, as you can see from Wikipedia's kind of definition up here. What happens is the Spanish, first off, and Portuguese, they have a lot of trade that's going on in the Caribbean. We see the French get involved, we see the English come in, and there becomes a big era of pirates, who are, some of them are not even sailing for countries or nations, and they just realize there's lots of gold going back and forth, lots of sugar, lots of tobacco, lots of these supplies going back and forth, and they start robbing ships independently. And we have people like Sir Francis Drake, who's involved in piracy, and he's pretty much being a pirate for England and stealing things for England and the Queen. He would call himself a privateer, meaning that he's looking for business and taking things from these ships. Everybody else would call him a pirate, which he pretty much was. This is an era of fighting that's going on between nations of Western Europe and North America, and they're trying to fight against pirates, trying to stop them. Some nations are promoting pirates. Many of them have pirates to fight against the Spanish, who are dominating in the beginning of this period. So some pirates are going for nations like England. Some pirates are independent, just going out trying to get rich for themselves. And we see this happening in the Caribbean, especially in the early modern era. Significant as this is showing a big fight that's going on for a lot of the products and resources in the early modern era. The 30 Years' War. This thing's kind of a bit messy here. The biggest things to know about the 30 Years' War is that it is basically a fight for power in Europe. Religion definitely plays a role. It's mostly Protestants against Catholics, although the French, who are Catholics, join the Protestant side because they want to see a balance for power. What we kind of see here is there's Protestants versus Catholics, but a lot of it also is the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, which were ruled under the same people. They are kind of going against a lot of the other nations in Europe. It's basically a war trying to fight for power in Europe. It's from 1618 to 1648. Now, when the 30 Years' War ends, it kind of establishes basically that you can be Protestant or you can be Catholic. There will be some religious freedom that goes on in Europe with the Peace of Westphalia. It also helps establish borders and boundaries in Europe, weakens the Holy Roman Empire, strengthens places like France in this time as well. It's significant because it's a battle over religion, Protestants versus Catholics, but it's also kind of a battle for power in Europe, which ends with a lot of the nation states like France and Spain competing for power at this time, and Europe kind of being balanced with no big dog, no one really powerful at 1648, no more powerful than the others at this time. So significant, a battle over religion, Protestants versus Catholics. You can have your religious freedom with the Peace of Westphalia, but it kind of leaves Europe in a place where there's still competition and no one on top. Of course, the 30 Years' War never would have happened without the Reformation. The Reformation is basically when the Christian church in Western Europe splits into Christians and Protestants. Catholics and Protestants. It splits into Catholics and Protestants. Catholics stay with the Catholic Church with the Pope as the head. Protestants break off into many, 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 many different sects, like the Anglican Church in England, Lutherans, Presbyterians, and other groups, Calvinists. And think of Protestants like protest. They're protesting against the Catholic Church at this time. It begins with Martin Luther, who nails his 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany. And pretty much Europe now becomes a land where there's many different ways to practice Christianity, Catholicism, and many different Protestant religions. This will lead up to the 30 Years' War and will also cause a lot of fighting as it kind of gets decided. Some kings and empires in places like the Holy Roman Empire, princes and nobles can choose if they want to be Catholic or Protestant. And we see a lot of fighting that will lead up to the 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia, which eventually leads to a little more religious tolerance, and you can choose your own sect of Christianity. It doesn't go beyond Christianity, but you can choose your own way of practicing Christianity in Europe at the end of the Reformation. Cardinal Richelieu. Cardinal Richelieu is very important because he's not the guy. He's not the king. He's the guy behind the guy. Basically, Cardinal Richelieu was the person who helps establish absolute monarchy in France. He's behind the scenes, helping the king gain more power, helping basically France become a very strong Catholic nation at this time, and building absolute monarchy, which will lead to Louis XIV. Remember, he's the one with the nice legs. Which will lead to Louis XIV having an absolute monarchy, building Versailles and all that. It would not have been possible without Cardinal Richelieu's scheming behind the scenes. He's also one of the big people who wants France in the 30 Years' War to be joining the side of the Protestants because he sees, well, you know, Holy Roman Empires, they're Catholic like us, but they're a bit too strong. Let's go against them to kind of bring their power down, and maybe we can bring our power up. He's very much someone who looks around and tries to take advantage of the situation. Significant for building more absolute monarchy and more power for the king and France as a power in the early modern era. The Holy Roman Empire, one of the weirdest things in European history. So the Holy Roman Empire wasn't Roman, and it kind of was an empire, kind of not. You see this a lot here. No one got sick and puked there. That is all the different like little lands and principalities that exist in the Holy Roman Empire at different times. Here's what you really need to know about the Holy Roman Empire. One time it was ruled by Charles V. He ruled Holy Roman Empire and Spain down here too. So the Holy Roman Empire was a very powerful empire that a lot of Europe was afraid of. They rally against it to fight against them like France does in the 30 Years' War. And Holy Roman Empire does become powerful. Spain and the Holy Roman Empire are able to bring back lots of silver, lots of gold, but their power kind of gets checked by the other European powers at this time. It never really gets fully organized after that, and it will last until eventually it kind of morphs into this Prussia-Germany type thing later on. It is a power in Europe at this time. Other European countries are afraid of it, and they kind of bring it down in the 30 Years' War. Significant for its power that it gains. It's also the home where the Reformation happens, which means some people in the Holy Roman Empire become Protestant and some become Catholic. It's kind of a mess. So the Holy Roman Empire is this messy kind of empire that exists, becomes powerful, and is eventually stopped during the early modern era. If it was able to grow, it would have meant that there would have been one large, very strong European empire at this time, which could have been huge. But that didn't happen, and eventually that power goes more towards our maritime empires like Spain, Portugal, England, and France. So they get checked and they kind of get held back, and they'll rise much, much later as new nations like Germany and Austria-Hungary Empire. The House of Habsburg, or the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs are a royal family. If we look right here, who pretty much control the Holy Roman Empire from 1438 all the way to 1740. They also have their family in many other empires like Spain and other places, and they are basically a large royal family who has continued influence in Europe's politics during the early modern era. Significant in helping build and maintain the Holy Roman Empire and many other royal families at this time. The Peace of Westphalia, which happens in 1648. The Peace of Westphalia is most famous for ending the 30 Years' War. It's also famous for establishing more of a choice of religion in Christianity. You could be a Protestant or you could be a Catholic at the end of Peace of Westphalia. It also severely weakens the Holy Roman Empire, makes the Dutch into a more powerful player at this time as they get more independence at this time. And France also becomes a bit stronger too in this. So the Peace of Westphalia ends in 1648. We have like a variety of European powers that are going to gain power. More of them are going to be the maritime powers, especially we see the Dutch Republic is going to gain more power. France and England will become stronger out of this. And there's more tolerance for religion at the end of the 30 Years' War with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. The Ottoman and Safavid conflict. This was a conflict between two different sects of Islam in this time period. The Ottomans were the Sunni Muslims. The Safavids were the Shia Muslims, also being over territory and power as well, as most wars are. The big thing about this conflict is the Ottomans were basically looking to take over Europe at this time, which would have been extremely significant because they had the gunpowder to do so at this time. But they really couldn't because they had a conflict with the Safavid Empire at this time as they're both battling for power. So this is a battle over interpretation of religion, which still exists to today. There are still many Sunni Muslims who are dominant. They were for the Ottoman Empire. And there is Shia Muslims in Iran today and also in Iraq, which is pretty significant today as well. So this is a conflict in Islam which pits them against each other. It does, in a way, because they're fighting each other, brings down them as powers, but also as a power of two of the main, I'll use the word power a bunch here, powers at this time. The Ottomans do gain the upper hand, and they gain more power in this conflict, but the Safavids are not totally erased or anything. They still maintain their position in Persia at this time. Food riots in England and France at this time. These are basically a sign that a lot of the people are not happy because the price of food is going up because the cost and inflation of a lot of goods is going up with increased international trade and lots of people bringing in more money, more Spanish silver. So many of the peasants who have their farmland can't afford the food. And this causes them to riot in both England and France. And it's a real test of the power of the nobility and also the kings in these countries at this time. It's significant because it's showing up right now, but it'll become even more significant in the next era when we start seeing rebellions and revolutions happening in these areas in the modern era. So it's a sign that the regular people aren't happy because a lot of this new wealth in the world is not going to them, and they're seeing prices go up because of increase of silver and gold. But they're not seeing any of the money. The prices are going up, and they need more food, so they're rioting. The Satsuma Rebellion is another rebellion against change in this time period. This is actually in the modern era, but it's thrown into our standards for this time, so we'll explain it a little bit. There's a Meiji government that comes to power in Japan, and they want to modernize. They want to bring in new technology, they want to bring in guns and other weapons, and the samurais want no part of this because their elite status in society is now being basically brought down a couple levels with increased technology, more business, more trade. So the samurais rebel and revolt in the Satsuma Rebellion, and they are put down because their swords are really no match for the guns that are coming out in this era. And so it's a rebellion against the samurais of the old system, rebelling against the new system and new money and new technology that's coming into Japan at this time. We'll get back to the next era. The German Peasants War, 1525. Now this takes place because after the Reformation, many of the peasants are told, and they read the works of Martin Luther, or have it read to them, the works of Martin Luther, where it says that they can rebel against the priests who don't have power over them. Many of them take this as, well, the nobles shouldn't have power over us either. And they rebel against the society and fight against the nobility, which had a lot of power in the Holy Roman Empire, which is what Germany was. And so they revolt against the nobles, against the society. Martin Luther actually says that they need to be put down, actually calls them agents of the devil, and he says, no, you don't need to follow the church, but you need to follow the government of the Holy Roman Empire. So there's a rebellion of the peasants, and they are put down, and they are slaughtered and killed by the Holy Roman Empire as they are rebelling against the nobility and hierarchical structure that exists in the Holy Roman Empire.